Great. Now that you've understood how to create a new document, let's also understand how to export a file so that you can use it in different use cases. This is what we're going to learn in this video, which is Photoshop file formats. So Photoshop has multiple formats to export and import files as well. Let's see very quickly the kind of list or the kind of files that are available for Photoshop to import. Now this varies from audio and video formats in case you're going to use that in the later situations. But let's just go through all these lists right now, and then we'll understand some of the most commonly used file formats that you'll probably come across very often when you're using over the internet as well. So the first set of things is for audio import formats. This is AAC, M2A, M4A, MP2 and MP3. And similarly, there are video import formats also. So there are these multiple formats that you can import a video into Photoshop and use it for the use case. Similarly, now I can export these videos also. This is something that we learned towards the end of the course, but let's understand what are the export formats. You can do this in DPX, MOV, MP4 and JPEG 2000. That's QuickTime format. And when you're using 3D elements in Photoshop, in case the Photoshop still supports 3D for you when you're using it, these are the formats that Photoshop last supported before it was depreciated. 3D Studio, DEA, Flash 3D, JPS, KMZ, MPO, U3D and Wavefront OBJ. Wavefront OBJ is one of the most used formats across the different 3D platforms. Now this is for the video and the 3D and audio. And let's understand the crux of it, which is the graphic file formats. Now Photoshop provides a lot of different ways in which you can export a particular canvas or an image that you're working on. The multiple ways that are over here are WebP, BMP, Cineon, CompuServe, GIF, and a couple of others. The most commonly used are JPEG. You'll probably see something on the PNG. You'll also see Photoshop PDF or basically just a simple PDF. These are the most used formats, and we learn about these formats in greater detail over now. And we learn about the most used Photoshop formats. But before that, let me quickly show you how to export a file. So over here, I have a Photoshop file open. I do not have anything in it, but you can of course have something and then you can try to save it. So in case you have something like this, you can always go to File, click on Save As, or you can click on Save if you have already saved one file somewhere, and you can click on Save As. Now over here, you can create or navigate to the location where you want to go. And once you've gone to that location, let's say I want to do this over here under Photoshop Training and Shortcuts, you can save this with the file, and Save As Type comes over here. Now this is where you can choose what format you would want to save the file in, whether it's Photoshop large format document, BMP, GIF, JPEG, there's PDF, PNG. These are the ones, as I said, we are going to be using quite often. So these are all the formats which are available over here. You can select the one that you'd want and then save it as necessary. So this is how you export or save a file in a particular format. And let's go back and understand the various kinds of formats that we see regularly. Great. So the first and most commonly used Photoshop file format is basically PSD. Every time that you see a file with a .psd extension, you know that this is something that can be opened in Photoshop, hoping that there are layers available inside the document. Now, generally, this is the default file format, apart from PSB, which is apart from BSB, which is used largely for supporting very large files. And Photoshop, when you're saving the file as PSD, this is directly integratable and across the different Adobe products such as Adobe InDesign, Premiere, After Effects, Go Live, and in these softwares as well, you can import a PSD and use and preserve as many Photoshop features which are there in the original document. So that's going to be your save as format when you're creating or saving a file that can be edited again in Photoshop. Moving on, the next one that you probably see is Photoshop RAW format. Now this is something that you use when you're working a lot with photographs. If you use a camera before, you might have seen an option that says Save Raw Images. Now raw images are very high quality photos that can be imported into Photoshop and then they can be exported from there as well. And that maintains a lot of information about the photograph. Now when I say information, this could mean the kind of levels, the curves that can be placed around, or the hues and the saturation of different aspects of the photo. Now these photos can be saved or can be formatted as a CMYK or an RGB or a grayscale format with alpha channels. When I say alpha, that basically means you will be able to see the transparent layers in case you have those layers visible inside your image. If you have transparent layers and you do not have anything in the background, it might just look white. And of course, this format also saves, as it says on the slide, multi-channel and lab images without alpha channels. That's another variation of how you're going to be using this for photography. Now, the thing is, when you're saving the raw file or when you're saving a Photoshop raw format, you'll not be able to save or retain the layers. You'll be able to use that only for information capturing. Great. Okay. The next thing that you'll probably see and you've used a lot in the past also is a JPEG format. It might be coded in your system that you might have come across as .jpeg or JPG. These are very similar, very minor differences, but for the sake of understanding, let's consider them as same. Now, this is the most used format to display photographs or any other sort of images. These support multiple formats, CMYK, RGB and grayscale, but these do not support transparency. So in case if you're saving one file with certain transparent layers, but you've saved it as a JPEG, you'll not be able to see the transparency. You'll see probably a white layer over there. Now, JPEG also retains all the color information of an RGB image, but this is slightly compressed. Now, when I say compressed, Photoshop selectively deletes some information from all the pixels so that the file size can be brought down to a justifiable manner. Now, what could also happen is if you're choosing for high compression, that means that that's an option when you're selecting this in Photoshop, you might lose out a lot of detail. That basically means lower quality. And you can also choose lower compression. That means higher quality and of course higher file size as well. So that depends on the kind of use case where you're using it. And lastly, if you choose, and it's not necessary, if you choose the maximum quality output, it might be the 100% quality, but it could also be that it's not everything that your original file has. So there is quite a chance of file losses or information loss when you're saving this in a JPEG format. To get over this format, there's something called the PNG format. Now this is portable network graphics, and this is the lossless compression format and used for almost everywhere else on the internet. Now these PNG images also have the transparency. So in case you're using something, let's say like a logo, where you'd want to see across the border or you'd want to see across the blank spaces, you should be looking for a PNG format on the internet. These are generally without jagged edges, and because these are very high quality and these are almost without compression. PNG images also support RGB, index color, grayscale and bitmap mode without alpha channels. That again means in these cases, you'll not see the alpha channels or you'll not be able to see the transparency. The transparency is retained only in the grayscale and RGB images. Now, the next thing that you'll probably see being used a lot from Photoshop or being exported from Photoshop is the PDF format. You might have used PDF across the internet, but PDF is basically a format that retains all of the information from an original document, including their page layouts, fonts, image, different kinds of images, vector and bitmap graphics both, and all of this can get saved, and it's not possible to edit it from a user standpoint when they're reading it. That basically means your PDF files can contain all of this information without causing loss or causing a change of information while the transfers are happening. This is quite common on the internet where you're saving or when you're sharing across a file, there's a possibility of files being damaged, and PDF avoids that damage by working with a cross-platform and a cross-application file format. I'll not get into the details of that, but we can of course keep that as a discussion for later. There are two different file outputs that we can choose when you're exporting from Photoshop. The first one is Photoshop PDF files. So when you're saving a Photoshop compatible PDF file, that basically means a PDF file that can be saved with all those settings as I just discussed, but it also allows you to modify the same PDF through Photoshop. That means it can contain and you can edit those layers as necessary. But these files can contain only a single image. That means a single canvas. The other format is a standard PDF file. Now everything that we have discussed is also done over here very similarly, and they can contain multiple pages and images. But then again, you lose out on the option of it being Photoshop compatible. That basically means you'll not be able to edit it or change it after you have exported it into a standard format. And that's basically everything about the files that you need to see. Depending on what format you're choosing, you might have certain different kind of options and boxes, and going through all of that is quite easy. It's not anything complicated. Let's go through that over here right now. So I have an image over here. If I start to save this as the Photoshop document, it absolutely will have no problem statements. It will not have any questions at all when I'm trying to save this, and it will get saved directly in that location. If I try to save this as a JPEG, this was the first one that we did see. You'll see this dialog box option that comes up over here. The options over here are image options and the highest quality. The quality can of course be at maximum of 12. You can also choose low quality, or you can choose medium, high and maximum. This scale also depicts the kind of file versus the quantity that you probably see, and the number that you do see over here is the size of the image. So if I move on to the large file, you'd see a higher resolution or a higher number of the image size, or when it's smaller, it's a fairly smaller number. There are a few things on the format options: baseline, optimize, and progressive. These are different ways in which the JPEG file are saved. I generally use progressive, and then you can continue with that as well. So that's for JPEG. Moving on to the next format that we did see, that is PNG. So when I do save it as a PNG, the only option that it chooses or basically asks me is for large file size, which will take least amount of time to save the file, and it will have a large size. And there are two different variations over here with medium file size and smallest file size. And of course, the compression being higher or lower, the Photoshop software might take time to save the file, but you'll have at the end of the day a lossless or a low quality loss format or file that comes at the end of it. So that's how to save for a PNG format. And then lastly, as we discussed, was the PDF format. And if I select PDF over here, that's it, Photoshop PDF. And when I do select that, it has a new dialog box that comes up that shows something like this. There are various options over here. There is general, compression, output, security, and summary. I generally go to general and choose one of the set presets which are available over here with Photoshop. So it could be high quality print, or it could be smallest file size that I generally use. You can also see the options over here. The options have preserve Photoshop editing capabilities, embed page thumbnails, and optimize for fast web preview. If you need the file to be able to be edited after you've worked on it, you should select this option. Else you can uncheck this, and then you can continue with the saving format. You can also save a preset in case you have a very specific format, or if you want the files to be saved according to the same conditions or the same directions every time. So you can do that by clicking on Save Preset over here. And those are the ways of saving these files across different formats. You can also choose to explore the other options over there, but be wary of where you're going to use the file. You might not be able to choose or select another option unless it is permitted by the platform that you're using. So in my case, I've primarily used everywhere JPEG and PNG, depending on the kind of situation, whether transparency or not, or whether high quality or lossless, and low quality or just for internet viewing. I've probably used JPEG. So you might want to just verify the kind of the format that the file needs to be in, and then you can choose to export accordingly. And that's it for file types.